We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, you're invited to immerse yourself in a collection of timeless Zen stories, tales that hold the forgotten wisdom for finding deep, unwavering peace. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. We're honored to guide you through a carefully chosen selection of these narratives, each a key to unlocking the deepest secrets of inner stillness and genuine understanding. These aren't just stories, they're deep insights, transformative teachings unearthed from centuries of practice, designed to gently guide you towards deep rest and profound internal clarity. Each tale contains a powerful lesson that can reshape your entire relationship with restlessness, overthinking, and the endless search for contentment. As the ancient Zen proverb teaches, when the mind is empty, the world is full. As we journey through this ancient wisdom, you'll notice something profound begin to unfold within you. The weight of daily worries will begin to lighten. The continuous hum of your thoughts will start to soften. You'll find yourself effortlessly sinking into a state of deep understanding, leading to restorative rest and true peace. So settle in deeply now. Allow your body to fully release into whatever supports you. Take one slow, conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you're about to receive timeless teachings that have been waiting to bring you peace for a long time. Let us now explore a story about the direct path to awakening. In a quiet monastery nestled in the mountains, where morning mist clung to ancient pine trees and the air carried the scent of incense and cedar, a young student had spent countless hours poring over sacred texts. His fingers were stained with ink from copying sutras, his eyes weary from reading by candlelight. Years had passed since he first arrived at the monastery, eager and hopeful, believing that somewhere within the thousands of pages of Buddhist teachings lay the key to enlightenment. Day after day, he studied the intricate philosophies, memorized complex doctrines, and debated fine points of interpretation with his fellow students. Yet despite his dedication and scholarly achievements, something essential eluded him. The more he learned about the path, the further away the destination seemed to become. Books had become barriers rather than bridges. Concepts had created confusion rather than clarity. On this particular morning, frustration finally overwhelmed him. He gathered his courage and approached his Zen master's simple dwelling. The wooden floors creaked softly under his feet as he entered the sparse room where his teacher sat in quiet meditation. Sunlight filtered through paper screens, creating gentle patterns on the tatami mats. The student bowed deeply, his heart heavy with disappointment. "Master," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I have studied the teachings for many years. I have read the Lotus Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the writings of the great masters. I have memorized countless verses and contemplated their meanings, but I still have not found the way. How may I enter the truth?" The master opened his eyes slowly, regarding his earnest student with compassion. But instead of offering another teaching or directing him to another text, the master simply sat in silence. His presence was still and alert, like a mountain that has witnessed countless seasons without being disturbed by any of them. The student waited, expecting words of wisdom, perhaps a reference to a sutra he had missed or a practice he should undertake. Minutes passed. The silence stretched between them, growing deeper and more profound. From outside the room, through the open window, came the gentle sound of the river flowing in the valley below. The water moved over smooth stones, creating a soft, continuous murmur that had been present all along, but had gone unnoticed beneath the student's anxious thoughts. The sound seemed to fill the space between master and student, neither intrusive nor demanding attention, simply present like breath itself. After what felt like an eternity, the master finally spoke, his voice as gentle as the flowing water. "Do you hear the sound of that river?" he asked. The student, still focused on his question about finding the way, replied without hesitation, "Yes, master, I do." The master nodded slowly, a slight smile touching his lips. "Enter from there." Upon hearing these words, something shifted in the student's understanding. The sound of the river, which had been merely background noise, suddenly revealed itself as the very teaching he had been seeking. In that instant, he realized that truth had been flowing constantly around him and through him, as accessible as his own hearing, as immediate as this present moment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, the teaching is like a finger pointing to the moon. Do not mistake the finger for the moon. This ancient insight illuminates the profound lesson hidden within the sound of the river. The student had spent years studying the finger, the words and concepts that point toward truth, while missing the moon itself, the direct experience of reality that exists beyond all conceptual understanding. Why do we become lost in the complexity of spiritual seeking when simplicity itself contains the answer? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that create this confusion. First is our addiction to complexity. The mind believes that profound truths must be difficult to understand, that enlightenment requires elaborate preparation and sophisticated knowledge. This belief creates what Zen calls making a problem where none exists. Second is our tendency to seek tomorrow what is available today. We imagine that awakening lies at the end of a long journey of accumulation, gathering more teachings, more experiences, more understanding. Yet the river of awareness flows right now, requiring no preparation or qualification to be heard. Third is our habit of looking away from the obvious. The most profound truths often hide in plain sight, so simple and immediate that our complex minds overlook them completely. We search for exotic wisdom while missing the ordinary miracle of consciousness itself. The river in this story represents the constant flow of pure awareness that underlies all experience. It flows whether we notice it or not, whether we understand it or not, whether we deserve it or not. This awareness is not something we achieve through study or practice. It is the very capacity that makes study and practice possible. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The student had been rejecting his direct experience in favor of his thoughts about experience, missing the immediate reality in favor of concepts about reality. Consider how often throughout your day you miss the river sounds of your own life. The breath moving through your body, the sensation of aliveness in your hands, the spacious awareness in which all thoughts and emotions arise and pass away. These are not preliminary practices leading to some future awakening. They are the awakening itself, available in each moment. The Buddha said, Look within. You are the Buddha. This is not metaphorical encouragement, but literal instruction. The same awareness that knows the sound of the river is the Buddha nature that every teaching points toward. No amount of study can create this awareness because it is what makes study possible. No practice can produce it because it is what recognizes the results of practice. Tonight, as you rest in the quiet of this moment, can you hear the river sound of your own awareness? Not thinking about awareness, but the aware presence that knows these very words are being read. Can you enter from there, discovering that what you have been seeking has been present all along, as intimate as hearing itself? As the Buddha taught, what we are today comes from our thoughts of yesterday, and our present thoughts build our life of tomorrow. When we stop building elaborate thoughts about truth and simply rest in the immediate recognition of what is already present, we discover that seeking ends where listening begins. Our next story reveals the transparent nature of spiritual teaching through a moment of recognition on a mountain path. Master Dogo was known throughout the region as a teacher who possessed an unusual gift for revealing the essence of Zen through the most ordinary circumstances. Unlike many masters who relied on formal lectures or complex koans, Dogo had a way of pointing directly to truth through whatever presented itself in the natural flow of daily life. On this particular afternoon, Dogo was walking on the mountain with his devoted disciple, Zengen. They had been walking in companionable silence along a winding path that meandered through groves of ancient trees. The late spring air carried a sense of renewal and awakening. Cherry blossoms had recently fallen, carpeting the ground with delicate pink petals, and new growth was emerging everywhere they looked. As they climbed higher, the sweet, intoxicating fragrance of mountain laurel blossoms began to fill the air. The white and pink flowers clustered on bushes along the path, their perfume so rich and pervasive that it seemed to envelop the two travelers like an invisible embrace. Bees moved lazily among the blossoms, and butterflies danced in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. Zengen had been studying with Master Dogo for several years, always hoping for some special transmission of wisdom, some secret teaching that would unlock the mysteries of Zen. He had heard stories of masters who possessed hidden knowledge, esoteric practices, and profound insights available only to their closest disciples. Often, he wondered when his teacher would finally share these deeper teachings with him. As they paused at a particularly beautiful spot, where the mountain laurel grew in thick, fragrant clusters, Master Dogo turned to his disciple with the casual air of someone making simple conversation. The question seemed to arise as naturally as the fragrance itself. "Do you smell the blossoms of the mountain laurel?" Dogo asked, his tone completely ordinary, as if inquiring about the weather or the time of day. Zengen, still thinking about hidden teachings and secret wisdom, replied straightforwardly, "Yes, Master, I do." Dogo paused, his eyes twinkling with gentle amusement. He looked directly at his student with an expression of complete openness and transparency. In that moment, his face reflected the same clarity as a still mountain lake, hiding nothing, concealing nothing, holding nothing back. "There," he said simply, gesturing to the fragrant air around them, "I have hidden nothing from you." In that instant, something profound shifted in Zengen's understanding. He realized that he had been searching for hidden treasures while standing in the middle of infinite wealth. The teaching had always been completely present and available, as obvious as fragrance, as immediate as breath, as transparent as the air itself. There were no secret doctrines, no esoteric knowledge, no hidden wisdom beyond what was freely given in each moment. The Buddha once said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." What emerges from this story is the recognition that genuine spiritual teaching holds nothing back, conceals nothing, and offers everything freely to anyone with the capacity to receive it. Why do we imagine that truth must be hidden, that wisdom must be earned through special qualifications or lengthy preparations? Zen Buddhism points to several illusions that create this misconception. First is our conditioned belief in scarcity. Having lived in a world where valuable things are hoarded, protected, and sold, we project this same logic onto spiritual truth, imagining that the most profound insights must be similarly rationed and restricted. Second is our attachment to specialness. The ego craves exclusive access to unique knowledge that sets us apart from others. This desire for spiritual superiority creates the fantasy that awakening belongs only to a chosen few who have discovered secret pathways unavailable to ordinary people. Third is our misunderstanding of the teacher-student relationship. We imagine that masters possess something we lack, that they hold wisdom we must somehow extract from them through proper behavior or sufficient devotion. This creates a dynamic of seeking and withholding rather than recognition and sharing. The mountain laurel fragrance represents the continuous availability of truth in our immediate experience. Like fragrance, wisdom cannot be hoarded or hidden. It naturally permeates everything it touches. The master's teaching is not something separate from the student's capacity to receive it. Both the fragrance and the nose that smells it arise together in the same moment of experience. Zen teacher Bankei Yotaku expressed this perfectly. You're perfectly free right from the start. You don't have to achieve freedom. The very idea that you have to achieve something is what keeps you from realizing that you're already free. This freedom is not hidden behind years of practice or esoteric knowledge. It is as present as the ability to smell mountain laurel. Consider the hidden in plain sight teachings available in your own life right now. The warmth of compassion when you comfort a friend. The spontaneous joy that arises when you witness beauty. The peace that naturally emerges in moments of quiet presence. These are not preliminary glimpses of some greater truth to come. They are the truth itself, offered freely, without qualification or reservation. The Buddha taught, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." Yet this path is not a journey towards something absent, but a recognition of what is already fully present. The very capacity to walk is the destination itself. Modern life often trains us to believe that valuable teachings must be complex, expensive, or exclusive. We attend workshops searching for hidden techniques, read books seeking secret formulas, follow teachers hoping they will reveal what others have concealed. Yet the most profound teaching remains utterly simple and completely available, the direct recognition of what is already here. Tonight, as you breathe in whatever fragrances surround you, perhaps the scent of evening air, coffee, flowers, or simply the smell of home, can you recognize that nothing essential is being hidden from you? Can you smell the mountain laurel of this very moment, discovering that the teaching you seek has been offering itself freely all along? As the Buddha said, the whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you. Depend on no one. Only the moment you reject all help are you freed. In the transparent sharing of truth, we discover that what we imagined was hidden was simply waiting for us to stop looking away from what is always already present. Our next story reveals a profound lesson about the nature of anger and our projections onto others. This is The Empty Boat. A young boatman known for his fiery temper was ferrying his small wooden craft across a wide, misty river in the early morning hours. He took great pride in his navigational skills and the care he brought to his work. But the slightest inconvenience or disruption could send him into a blazing rage. His reputation for explosive anger was well known among the other river workers, who often avoided him during his darker moods. On this particular morning, thick fog had settled over the water, reducing visibility to just a few feet in any direction. The boatman squinted through the grey mist, carefully steering his vessel across the familiar waters. Suddenly, through the swirling fog, he saw another boat moving directly toward him on a collision course. "Hey, turn aside!" he shouted into the mist, his voice echoing across the water. "You're going to hit me! Can't you see where you're going?" But the other boat continued steadily forward, showing no sign of changing direction. The boatman's anger began to build as he shouted again, his voice now filled with fury. He cursed the other pilot's carelessness and incompetence, his rage growing with each passing second. Despite his increasingly angry warnings, the other boat struck his own with a solid, jarring thud. Now boiling with indignation, the boatman was ready to leap into the other vessel and give its foolish pilot a piece of his mind. He prepared himself for a confrontation, ready to unleash all his pent-up frustration on the person who had so carelessly disrupted his morning journey. His fists were clenched, his face red with anger as he moved toward the other boat. But as he peered through the mist at the vessel that had struck him, he discovered something that stopped him completely. The boat was empty. There was no pilot at the tiller, no person to blame or confront. It was simply a drifting boat that had been carried into his path by the river's current. In that instant, his anger vanished completely. It was impossible to be furious at an empty boat. There was no target for his rage, no one to receive his harsh words. All the aggressive energy that had built up inside him suddenly had nowhere to go. He simply pushed the empty vessel away and continued his journey, his mind now as calm as the misty river around him. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how much of our anger is directed at empty boats, projections of intention where none exists. This tale unveils a fundamental truth about the nature of human reactivity. Most of our emotional suffering comes not from what others actually do to us, but from the stories we create about their motivations, intentions, and character. We assume malice where there might be distraction, disrespect where there might be ignorance, and personal attack where there might be simple circumstance. Why do we so readily populate empty boats with imaginary pilots to blame? Our minds evolved to quickly assess threats and assign agency to potentially dangerous situations. This survival mechanism served our ancestors well when distinguishing between a rustling bush caused by wind versus a predator. But in modern social situations, this same tendency leads us to attribute deliberate, harmful intent to actions that may have no such motivation. Think about your daily interactions. When someone cuts you off in traffic, do you immediately assume they're inconsiderate and selfish? When a colleague doesn't return your greeting, do you decide they're being rude or dismissive? When a friend cancels plans last minute, do you interpret it as a sign they don't value your friendship? In each case, you may be creating a pilot for an empty boat. The driver who cut you off might be rushing to the hospital with a sick child. Your colleague might be preoccupied with devastating personal news. Your friend might be struggling with anxiety or depression. Most people's actions have far more to do with their internal experience than with any intention to harm you. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we react to our interpretations rather than to what actually happened, we're fighting empty boats. This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to set appropriate boundaries. If someone's behavior affects you negatively, you can address it skillfully without creating elaborate stories about their motivations. You can say, "When you interrupted me, I felt unheard," rather than, "You're always so disrespectful and self-centered." The practice involves pausing when anger arises and asking, "Am I reacting to what actually happened, or to the story I'm telling myself about what happened? Am I angry at a person's actions, or at the pilot I've imagined in their empty boat?" In Zen meditation, we learn to observe our thoughts and emotions as passing phenomena rather than absolute truths. When anger arises, instead of immediately believing and acting on it, we can notice, "Anger is here. What story is my mind creating? What am I assuming about this person's intentions?" The Buddha said, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." Each time we populate an empty boat with a malicious pilot, we create suffering for ourselves. Each time we remember that most boats are simply drifting with the current, we free ourselves from unnecessary reactivity. Tonight, as you reflect on recent moments of frustration or anger, can you identify which boats were truly piloted and which were empty? Can you feel the difference in your body between reacting to harmful intent versus responding to simple circumstance? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. When we stop fighting empty boats, we discover that peace was available all along. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the fluid nature of circumstances and the wisdom of withholding judgment. This is the tale of an old farmer and the art of living with uncertainty. In a remote valley surrounded by rolling mountains, an elderly farmer lives with his adult son in a simple farmhouse that has sheltered their family for generations. Their life is modest but sufficient, sustained by a small plot of vegetables and their most valuable possession, a strong, reliable horse that helps with all the heavy work of farming and transportation. One morning, the farmer awakens to discover that the horse has disappeared during the night. The gate stands open, and there are no tracks indicating theft. The animal has simply wandered off into the vast wilderness beyond their valley. For a farming family, losing their only horse represents a catastrophic setback that threatens their livelihood and survival. Word of this misfortune spreads quickly through their small community. By afternoon, neighbors begin arriving to express their sympathy and support. "Oh, how terrible this is for you," they exclaim with genuine concern. "What dreadful luck! How will you manage the farm without your horse? This is truly a disaster." The old farmer listens to their well-meaning condolences with calm attention, then responds simply, "How do you know this is bad luck?" His neighbors exchange puzzled glances. Surely the loss of such an essential animal is obviously unfortunate. But the old man's serene expression reveals no trace of the distress they expect to see. He continues with his daily activities, as if nothing particularly significant has occurred. The next morning brings an extraordinary development. The missing horse returns, not alone, but followed by a small herd of wild horses, magnificent, powerful animals that have chosen to follow the domestic horse back to the farm. The farmer and his son quickly construct temporary fencing to contain this unexpected windfall. The same neighbors who had offered sympathy now rush over to share in the celebration. "What incredible good fortune," they declare with excitement. "You've gone from having one horse to owning an entire herd. This is the best luck anyone could imagine. You must be overjoyed by this blessing." Again, the old farmer listens thoughtfully to their enthusiastic congratulations before responding with the same calm curiosity. "How do you know this is good luck?" The following day, the farmer's son attempts to break one of the wild horses for riding. These animals, though beautiful, have never known human handling and resist fiercely. During the training session, the young man is thrown violently from the horse's back and suffers a severe break in his leg that leaves him unable to walk without assistance. Once more, the neighbors gather to offer their support in what appears to be another turn toward misfortune. "How dreadful," they lament, shaking their heads at this latest setback. "Just when things were looking so positive, this terrible accident happens. Your poor son. What bad luck has befallen your family again?" The old farmer tends to his son's injury with gentle care while responding to their expressions of sympathy with familiar words. "How do you know this is bad luck?" Within days, their question finds an unexpected answer. Military officers arrive in the valley with orders to conscript all able-bodied young men for a dangerous war against northern invaders. Most of these soldiers will not return home alive. However, when they examine the farmer's son, his broken leg makes him unsuitable for military service. He remains safely at home while other families say goodbye to their children, perhaps forever. The Buddha taught, every blessing ignored becomes a curse. Every curse faced becomes a blessing. What emerges from this story is the profound wisdom of holding our judgments about circumstances lightly, recognizing that our perspective is always partial and temporary. Why do we rush to label experiences as fortunate or unfortunate when their ultimate meaning remains unknown? Buddhist psychology explains that our minds seek the comfort of quick categorization, preferring the illusion of understanding to the discomfort of uncertainty. We want to know immediately whether to celebrate or mourn, to relax or worry, to feel grateful or resentful. This mental habit of instant evaluation reflects a deeper pattern of trying to control our emotional responses by controlling our interpretations of events. If we can quickly determine that something is good or bad, we believe we know how to feel and what to expect. This provides temporary psychological relief, but often proves premature and misleading. The old farmer's repeated question, "How do you know?" points to what Buddhist philosophy calls "don't know mind." This isn't ignorance, but wisdom, the recognition that reality unfolds in ways too complex and interconnected for our limited perspective to fully comprehend. What appears devastating in the moment may prove beneficial over time, while apparent blessings may carry hidden difficulties. Consider how many experiences in your own life have changed meaning as their consequences became clear. Perhaps a job rejection led to a better opportunity. Maybe a relationship ending created space for personal growth. Possibly an illness brought unexpected insights about what truly matters. The disappointment you felt at the time now seems misplaced given what followed. This doesn't mean we should become emotionally numb or stop having natural responses to events. The farmer certainly wanted his horse back and felt concern for his son's injury, but he distinguished between acknowledging immediate circumstances and creating elaborate stories about their ultimate significance. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught about beginner's mind, approaching each situation with fresh openness rather than predetermined assumptions about its meaning. When we practice this kind of mental flexibility, we become more resilient and responsive to changing conditions rather than rigid and reactive. The art of living that this story illustrates involves developing what Buddhists call equanimity, the capacity to remain present and responsive regardless of whether circumstances align with our preferences. This isn't passive resignation, but dynamic engagement without attachment to specific outcomes. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron describes this as learning to stay with the experience instead of immediately jumping to conclusions about what it means for our future happiness or security. When we can rest in not knowing, we often discover that our wisdom about how to respond emerges naturally from the situation itself. The farmer's approach also demonstrates tremendous faith, not in specific outcomes, but in the fundamental trustworthiness of life's process. He acts skillfully with whatever arises while remaining open to possibilities beyond his current understanding. Tonight, as you reflect on recent events you've labeled as fortunate or unfortunate, can you hold those judgments more lightly? Perhaps you'll discover that your peace of mind depends less on having good luck and more on developing the capacity to respond wisely to whatever unfolds. As the Buddha observed, everything changes, nothing remains without change. Let us continue our journey with a story about wisdom, acceptance, and the art of timing. This is Ikkyu and the Broken Cup. The young Zen student Ikkyu was known even as a child for his quick wit and profound understanding, qualities that would later make him one of Japan's most revered masters. At the time of our story, he was studying at Ankoku-ji Temple under the guidance of the head priest, a stern but compassionate teacher who valued both discipline and insight in his students. The head priest owned a very precious teacup, an ancient piece of ceramics that had been passed down through generations of temple masters. It was a rare and beautiful work of art, with delicate brushwork and a subtle glaze that seemed to capture light in its depths. The priest treasured this cup above all his other possessions, and he often warned the young students never to touch it, keeping it safely displayed on a high shelf in the main meditation hall. One cold winter day, Ikkyu and his fellow students were playing quietly in the main room while their teacher was away on temple business. The ancient wooden floors creaked softly under their feet, and the late afternoon light filtered through the paper screens, casting long shadows across the tatami mats. In their youthful enthusiasm, the boys were perhaps a bit too energetic in their games. As Ikkyu moved quickly to catch a small ball they were tossing back and forth, he accidentally knocked against the shelf where the precious cup sat. Time seemed to slow as he watched the treasured vessel fall through the air, and shatter into several pieces on the stone floor below. The sharp sound of breaking ceramic echoed through the quiet hall, like a bell announcing disaster. The other boys froze in terror, their faces pale with fear. They knew well the head priest's attachment to this cup and could already imagine his anger when he discovered what had happened. Some of the younger students began to whisper anxiously about what punishment might await them all. But instead of panicking or trying to hide the evidence, Ikkyu remained remarkably calm. He quietly gathered the broken pieces, carefully examining each fragment before tucking them into the wide sleeve of his robe. Then he called his fellow students to sit with him in meditation posture, asking them to remain peaceful and centered. When they heard the sound of their teacher's footsteps returning to the temple, Ikkyu instructed them to stay exactly where they were. The head priest entered the room and immediately noticed that his prized cup was missing from its usual place. His eyes swept the room, taking in the unusually still and formal posture of his students. Before he could grow angry or begin questioning them, young Ikkyu approached him with a serene expression, his hands respectfully positioned behind his back. "Master," Ikkyu asked with genuine curiosity and respect, "why is it that all things must eventually die?" The head priest, recognizing a sincere spiritual inquiry, set aside his concern about the missing cup and considered the question carefully. "That is the nature of existence itself," he answered gently. "Everything that is born is subject to decay and death. It is the fundamental law of impermanence that governs all phenomena. We must learn to accept this truth if we wish to find peace." At that moment, Ikkyu brought the broken pieces of the teacup from behind his back and presented them to his master with a slight bow. "Master," he said with perfect composure and deep understanding, "it was time for your cup to die." The head priest looked at the shattered fragments, then into the young boy's clear, untroubled eyes. He saw no malice, carelessness, or fear, only a profound acceptance of the very teaching he had just articulated. Instead of becoming angry, a slow smile spread across his weathered face, and he began to laugh softly. As the Buddha observed, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the relationship between wisdom and timing, between understanding impermanence intellectually and embodying it when life demands it. The deeper lesson here illuminates how genuine spiritual understanding transforms our relationship to loss and change. Ikkyu didn't break the cup deliberately, but when the accident occurred, he neither denied the reality nor became paralyzed by fear. Instead, he used the moment as an opportunity to demonstrate and deepen everyone's understanding of a fundamental Buddhist truth. This pattern reveals itself throughout our lives when we cling to objects, relationships, or circumstances as if they were permanent. We invest our sense of security in things that are, by their very nature, temporary. A job position, a home, a relationship, our physical health, our mental clarity, all are subject to the same law of impermanence that governed the priest's precious cup. Why do we struggle so deeply with this obvious truth? Our attachment to permanence serves as a psychological defense against the uncertainty that characterizes existence. We convince ourselves that if we can just control enough variables, maintain our possessions carefully enough, or love deeply enough, we can somehow exempt ourselves and what we cherish from the universal law of change. But Zen Buddhism teaches us that our suffering comes not from impermanence itself, but from our resistance to it. The cup was going to break eventually, perhaps in 10 years, perhaps in 100. Ikkyu's accident simply revealed what was always true. The cup's existence was temporary, and its beauty lay partly in that very transience. Consider how this wisdom applies to your own attachments. That favorite shirt that will eventually wear out, the car that will someday need replacing, the relationships that will change form or end, the abilities and qualities you currently possess that will inevitably diminish with age. Each of these is precious precisely because it is impermanent. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same wisdom Ikkyu demonstrated, accepting what is while remaining open to change and growth. This doesn't mean becoming detached or uncaring. The priest valued his cup and felt its loss, but Ikkyu's response invited him to hold that value within a larger context of understanding. We can love deeply while remembering that all forms are temporary, including the form of our love itself. The Buddha taught, it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. When the inevitable breakages occur in our lives, the job loss, the diagnosis, the relationship ending, the death of someone dear, we have a choice in how we meet these moments. Tonight, as you consider what you're holding tightly in your life, can you imagine what it might feel like to appreciate these gifts while acknowledging their temporary nature? Can you find the wisdom to say, when the time comes, it was time for this to die, and mean it with the same peaceful acceptance that Ikkyu demonstrated? As the Buddha reminded us, the trouble is, you think you have time. By embracing impermanence now, we discover a freedom that no loss can touch. Let us explore a story about the true nature of our emotional patterns. This is temper. In a peaceful monastery where cherry blossoms drifted like snow across stone pathways, a troubled man approached the renowned Zen master Bankei. The visitor's face bore the weight of years of struggle, his shoulders tense with the burden he carried within. "Master," the man said, bowing deeply, "I have come seeking your wisdom because I suffer from a terrible affliction. I was born with an uncontrollable temper that erupts without warning. No matter how hard I try to suppress it, this rage emerges and destroys my relationships, my peace, and my happiness. I have tried everything, meditation, prayer, even avoiding people altogether, but nothing works. Can you help me overcome this curse I was born with?" Bankei listened with gentle attention, observing not just the man's words, but the earnestness in his voice and the genuine desire for freedom from suffering. The master's eyes held a knowing compassion, as if he could see something the visitor could not. "What a fascinating thing you describe," Bankei replied, with genuine curiosity. "This terrible temper you were born with, I would very much like to see it. In fact, if you can show it to me right now, I will cure it for you immediately." The man paused, confused by this unexpected request. He looked within himself, scanning his inner landscape for the familiar flames of anger. But in this moment, sitting before the wise teacher in the tranquil setting, he found only calm awareness. Well, Master, I don't actually have the temper right now, he admitted. It's not here at this moment. It only appears suddenly when certain things happen, when someone criticizes me, or when I'm frustrated, or when things don't go as planned. Bankai nodded slowly, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Ah, I see. So this temper that you claim you were born with, it's not actually with you right now. It only appears under certain circumstances. If it were truly something you were born with, something that was your essential nature, wouldn't it be present all the time? The man's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. If his anger was truly innate, truly part of his fixed nature, it would never leave him. But here he sat, completely calm, the anger nowhere to be found. In that case, Bankai continued softly, this short temper is not something inherent in you at all. The Buddha once said, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth that anger, like all emotions, is not a permanent fixture of our identity, but a temporary arising that we often mistake for our essential nature. Why do we convince ourselves that difficult emotions are just who we are? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that create this misunderstanding. When we repeatedly experience certain emotional reactions, we begin to identify with them so completely that we cannot imagine ourselves without them. We say, I am an angry person, rather than, anger sometimes arises in my experience. This identification serves as a form of psychological protection. If we believe our reactivity is fixed and unchangeable, we avoid the responsibility and the freedom that comes with recognizing our capacity to respond differently. It feels safer to say, this is just how I am, than to acknowledge the more empowering truth that we have choice in every moment. Consider how often throughout your day you might declare aspects of your experience as permanent fixtures of your identity. I'm not a morning person. I'm terrible with technology. I'm just naturally anxious. Each of these statements reinforces the illusion that our patterns are immutable rather than simply habits that can be transformed through awareness and practice. Zen master Suzuki Roshi taught, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. This paradox points to the truth that while our essential nature is already whole and complete, the patterns we've layered over that nature through conditioning can be examined and shifted. The man in our story discovered what meditation practitioners call the gap, the space between thoughts, the pause between reactions, where our true nature exists unmarked by temporary emotional weather. In that gap, he could see clearly that anger was not his identity, but simply a conditioned response that arose under certain circumstances. When we recognize that our difficult emotions are visitors rather than permanent residents, we can greet them differently. Instead of, I am angry, we might observe, anger is arising. This subtle shift creates space for the emotion to be present without consuming our entire identity. Tonight, as you reflect on the patterns you might have labeled as just who you are, can you find the spaces where these patterns are absent? Can you locate the aware presence that remains constant, whether anger, sadness, or joy is present? As the Buddha taught, you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are the awareness that observes them. In recognizing this distinction, we discover the freedom that was always available beneath our conditioned responses. Let us now turn to a story about generosity in the face of poverty and the profound recognition of what truly cannot be stolen. This is the moon in the window. Master Ryokan lived in conditions of voluntary simplicity that would have challenged even the most committed ascetic. His small mountain hut contained virtually no possessions, no treasures, no valuable objects, no accumulations of any kind that might tempt a thief or provide security for the future. His few belongings consisted only of the most basic necessities: worn robes, simple eating utensils, and perhaps a book or two for contemplation. On this particular evening, as Master Ryokan rested peacefully in his humble dwelling, a sneak thief approached through the darkness, believing he had found an easy target in what appeared to be an unguarded dwelling. The thief moved carefully, avoiding any sounds that might alert the occupant to his presence, and managed to slip inside the hut undetected. Once inside, however, the burglar quickly discovered the reality of the master's lifestyle. He searched methodically through the small space, examining every corner and crevice where valuables might be hidden, but found absolutely nothing worth stealing. There were no coins, no jewelry, no fine fabrics, no tools of value, nothing that could be easily carried away and converted into money or traded for necessities. The thief stood in the middle of the sparse room, frustrated and disappointed by this complete lack of anything worth taking. He had risked detection and potential punishment for what appeared to be a completely fruitless endeavor. After investing time and effort in this nocturnal enterprise, he was faced with the prospect of returning home empty-handed, with nothing to show for his criminal efforts. Just as the discouraged thief was preparing to leave in defeat, Master Ryokan's voice emerged gently from the darkness. Rather than shouting for help or expressing anger at this intrusion into his privacy, the master spoke with the kind of compassionate concern he might show toward any guest who was experiencing difficulty. "Wait," the master called softly. "Don't leave yet." The thief froze, expecting to be confronted, accused, or perhaps threatened with consequences for his attempted burglary. Instead, he watched in amazement as Master Ryokan quietly rose from his sleeping area and began removing the old cotton-quilted bedclothes that provided his warmth during the cool mountain nights. Without a word of reproach or any indication that he considered this intrusion a violation, the master folded his bedding carefully and offered it to the bewildered thief. "Here," he said simply. "Take this. You've come all this way and deserve something for your trouble." The thief accepted the unexpected gift in stunned silence, unsure how to respond to such extraordinary generosity from someone he had intended to rob. This was unlike any encounter with a victim he had ever experienced. The master's kindness left him speechless and somehow ashamed of his original intentions. As the confused burglar departed with the master's bedding, Master Ryokan stood in his doorway and noticed that the moon had risen over the eastern mountains, casting its serene light across the landscape. The beauty of this sight inspired him to compose a traditional waka poem that captured both his physical situation and his spiritual understanding. Left untouched by the thief in his haste, the moon in the window. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." This tale unveils a teaching about the difference between material wealth and true abundance, and the recognition that our deepest treasures cannot be taken by any external force. This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with possession, security, and the fear of loss that dominates so much of human experience. Master Ryokan's response to the thief reveals someone who understood that genuine wealth consists not in what we accumulate, but in our capacity for generosity, compassion, and appreciation of beauty that requires no ownership. The master's immediate impulse to give something to the disappointed thief demonstrates a revolutionary understanding of abundance. Rather than feeling victimized by someone who had tried to take from him, he experienced concern for someone who seemed to be in need. His poverty became a source of generosity rather than a reason for defensiveness or fear. Why do we typically respond to attempted theft with anger, outrage, and desire for punishment rather than compassion for the thief's desperation? This reaction stems from our identification with our possessions as extensions of ourselves, and our belief that being robbed somehow diminishes our worth or security. But Master Ryokan's response suggests a different relationship with material goods, one based on stewardship rather than attachment. His poem about the moon reveals the profound teaching at the heart of this story. The thief could take material objects, but could never steal the master's appreciation of beauty, his capacity for wonder, his ability to find joy in simple, natural phenomena. These internal treasures, peace, contentment, aesthetic sensitivity, remain completely beyond the reach of any external threat. The image of the moon in the window represents all the gifts that life offers freely to anyone with eyes to see them. Beauty, mystery, natural wonder, and the kind of wealth that increases rather than decreases when shared. The thief left with fabric that would eventually wear out, but the master retained access to beauty that would never diminish, and joy that no one could take away. This teaching reveals the difference between having and being. Material possessions require constant protection, can be lost or stolen, and often create more anxiety than genuine security. But the qualities of consciousness that Master Ryokan embodied, generosity, peace, appreciation, become stronger through expression rather than weaker through sharing. We can observe similar dynamics in our own relationship with loss and theft. When someone takes something from us, do we focus primarily on what we've lost, or on our capacity to respond with wisdom and compassion? Can we recognize opportunities to practice generosity even in situations that initially seem to call for defensive reactions? The story also points us toward understanding true security. Master Ryokan felt safe not because he had elaborate locks or security systems, but because he had nothing worth stealing in conventional terms and everything worth having in spiritual terms. His security came from inner abundance rather than external accumulation. Zen practice cultivates what might be called non-possessive appreciation, the ability to enjoy beauty and goodness without needing to own or control them. When we can appreciate the moon without needing to possess it, we access a form of wealth that no economic conditions can threaten. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that voluntary simplicity means deprivation or sacrifice. But Master Ryokan's story suggests the opposite, that reducing our attachment to material accumulation can actually increase our access to the forms of wealth that truly matter. His poverty became a gateway to generosity rather than a limitation on his capacity to give. The thief's hasty departure suggests that he recognized something in the master's response that challenged his entire framework for understanding value and security. Being met with kindness instead of anger, generosity instead of defensiveness, probably planted seeds that would continue growing long after he left the mountain hut. Beyond this, there emerges a teaching about the transformative power of unexpected responses. By meeting attempted theft with spontaneous giving, Master Ryokan created a moment of grace that had the potential to change not only the thief's immediate experience, but his entire understanding of human nature and the possibilities for positive interaction. Tonight, as you consider what you most fear losing and what you consider your greatest treasures, can you distinguish between the possessions that can be taken from you and the qualities of awareness that remain completely beyond any external threat? What would it mean to invest more energy in developing the kind of wealth that increases through sharing rather than decreases through loss? As the Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. The moon in the window represents the eternal treasures that remain available to anyone who has learned to let go of attachment while remaining open to the beauty and wonder that no thief can ever steal. Let us explore a story about finding sweetness in the midst of danger. This is the wandering monk and the strawberry. A wandering monk was walking through a peaceful field, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his face and the gentle rustling of grass in the breeze. His mind was calm, focused on the beauty of the present moment, as he had trained himself to be through years of meditation practice. Suddenly, the tranquil silence was shattered by a ferocious roar. A massive tiger emerged from the tall grass, its golden eyes fixed upon him with predatory intensity. The monk's heart raced as he turned and fled, his robes billowing behind him as the tiger gave chase. His feet pounded against the earth as he ran desperately toward the edge of a high cliff. With no other path available and the tiger closing in behind him, he spotted a thick vine hanging over the precipice. Without hesitation, he grabbed hold of it and swung himself down over the edge, just as the tiger reached the cliff's edge and snarled from above. As he dangled there, suspended between earth and sky, the monk looked down and felt his heart sink. Far below, another tiger paced hungrily at the bottom of the cliff, waiting for him to fall. He was completely trapped. The tiger above could reach him if he climbed up, and the tiger below would devour him if he fell. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed two mice, one white and one black, scurrying out from a crevice in the cliff face. Together, they began to gnaw on the very vine that held his life. He watched them work, knowing that at any moment the vine would snap. His situation was utterly hopeless, with danger at every turn and time quickly running out. It was at that precise moment, as he accepted the complete impossibility of his predicament, that he noticed something extraordinary. Growing from a small ledge just within his reach was a single, perfect wild strawberry. Its red skin glistened in the sunlight, and it looked plump and delicious. Holding the vine with one hand, he gently plucked the strawberry with the other. He brought it to his lips, and as the mice continued to chew through the vine above him, he savored the fruit completely. It was the sweetest strawberry he had ever tasted. The Buddha once said, "The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion." This ancient wisdom illuminates a profound truth about the nature of consciousness and our relationship to circumstances beyond our control. The deeper teaching here reveals that life perpetually places us between tigers, the regrets and wounds of our past above us, and the fears and anxieties of our future below. The white and black mice represent the endless cycle of days and nights, constantly gnawing away at the vine of our existence. Yet even in this precarious position, suspended between dangers we cannot escape, moments of pure sweetness remain available to us. Why do we find it so difficult to taste the strawberry when tigers surround us? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned habit of projecting ourselves into past regrets or future fears, missing the immediate reality of what is actually happening now. When we're consumed with what was or what might be, we become blind to the present moment's offerings. This pattern reveals itself constantly in modern life. During a stressful work presentation, we might miss the support in a colleague's encouraging smile. While worrying about finances, we overlook the warmth of our morning coffee. In the midst of relationship conflict, we fail to notice a moment of unexpected tenderness. The strawberries are always there, but our minds are elsewhere. Consider how often throughout your day you find yourself suspended between tigers. Perhaps it's the anxiety of an upcoming medical appointment while simultaneously replaying yesterday's argument with a family member. Or the stress of work deadlines combined with worries about aging parents. In these moments, what strawberries might you be missing? The sound of rain against your window, the comfort of a warm sweater, the simple miracle of your breath flowing in and out. Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh spoke of this when he said, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The very transience that makes our situation precarious, the gnawing mice, the waiting tigers, also makes each moment precious and unique. The strawberry's sweetness is intensified by the brevity of the experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called strawberry mind, the capacity to fully receive whatever sweetness is available, even when surrounded by difficulty. This doesn't mean denying our challenges or pretending everything is fine. Rather, it means developing the ability to hold both realities simultaneously, acknowledging our vulnerable position while remaining open to unexpected gifts. The Buddha taught, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." When we observe our experience closely, we discover that even in our most difficult moments, elements of beauty, connection, and wonder continue to present themselves. Tonight, as you reflect on the challenges that feel like tigers in your life, can you also notice what strawberries are within reach? Perhaps it's the softness of your pillow, the quiet of the evening, or simply the remarkable fact that you're alive to experience this moment at all. As the Buddha reminded us, every morning we are born again. What we do today matters most. Each moment offers a new strawberry waiting to be savored. Let us keep going on our journey. The following story reveals the difference between helping and holding on. This is the lesson of the two monks and the woman at the river. Two monks were traveling together along a mountain path, making their way to a distant monastery where they planned to continue their studies. Both were dedicated practitioners who had taken strict vows as part of their spiritual training. including a vow to avoid all physical contact with women. This wasn't born from disrespect, but from their understanding that such discipline helped maintain focus on their spiritual development. As they approached a swollen river where the usual bridge had been damaged by recent storms, they encountered a young woman standing uncertainly at the water's edge. The current was strong and treacherous, filled with debris from the mountain runoff, and she was clearly afraid to attempt crossing alone. "Please, honored monks," she called to them, "could one of you help me cross this dangerous water? I'm not strong enough to make it safely on my own." One of the monks immediately tensed, his mind racing through their monastic rules and the potential complications of this situation. Physical contact with women was explicitly forbidden, and he began formulating explanations for why they couldn't help, perhaps suggestions for alternative solutions that wouldn't require breaking their vows. The other monk, however, took one look at the woman's predicament and the genuine danger she faced, and made a different choice. Without hesitation or lengthy deliberation, he walked to her side and gently lifted her onto his shoulders. He carried her carefully across the treacherous current, ensuring her safety with each step, and set her down gently on the far bank. "Thank you so much," she said gratefully, bowing to both monks before continuing on her way. The two monks resumed their journey, but the atmosphere between them had changed dramatically. The first monk walked in increasingly agitated silence, his mind churning with thoughts about what he had witnessed. As the hours passed, his internal tension grew until finally he could no longer contain his distress. "Brother," he burst out, unable to hold his silence any longer, "I cannot understand your behavior back at the river. Our spiritual training explicitly teaches us to avoid any physical contact with women. Yet you picked that woman up onto your shoulders and carried her across the water. How could you so blatantly violate our sacred vows?" His companion looked at him with gentle surprise and responded with perfect simplicity. "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river hours ago, but you are still carrying her." Buddha's wisdom teaches us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This tale unveils the profound difference between compassionate action and mental attachment, between responding to present needs and carrying past events. Why do we often carry situations long after they've ended, replaying scenarios and nursing grievances that only exist in our own minds? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our inability to release experiences once they've passed. The first monk's agitation demonstrates how rigid adherence to rules can sometimes conflict with the compassionate spirit that inspired those rules originally. His fellow monk saw a person in danger and responded with immediate kindness, then completely released the incident. But the first monk carried the event for hours, letting it grow heavier with each step. Consider your own tendency to replay past conversations, nurse old grievances, or mentally rehearse scenarios that have already ended. How much of your mental energy goes toward carrying situations that exist now only in memory? The woman crossed the river in minutes, but the monk carried her for hours through his own thoughts. This teaching applies to far more than dramatic violations of rules. We carry harsh words someone spoke years ago, mistakes we made decades past, embarrassing moments that no one else even remembers. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich with possibility and actual experience, goes unnoticed because we're too busy carrying ghosts from the past. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between appropriate action and unnecessary attachment. The second monk helped when help was needed, then moved on completely. He didn't dwell on whether he'd made the right choice, worry about others' opinions, or replay the incident endlessly in his mind. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The river crossing was impermanent. It began, served its purpose, and ended. Only the first monk's attachment to the event gave it ongoing existence in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax, right now, and rest." This teaching points directly to the freedom available when we stop carrying experiences beyond their natural lifespan. Look deeply at what you might be carrying unnecessarily. Old resentments, past failures, conversations that upset you, decisions you regret. All of these exist now only because you continue to pick them up and carry them. What would it feel like to set them down? The irony is profound. The monk who actually broke the rule experienced no suffering from it, while the monk who maintained perfect rule observance created hours of agitation for himself. This reveals that suffering often comes not from our actions, but from our thoughts about our actions. Tonight, as you notice your mind returning to past events, old grievances, or situations that have already ended, can you remember the wise monk's example? Can you practice setting down whatever you've been carrying unnecessarily, discovering the lightness that comes from traveling through life without the burden of yesterday's experiences? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. True spiritual practice isn't about perfect rule following, but about responding appropriately to what's actually present, then releasing it completely to make space for whatever comes next. Now, let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the paradox of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley, surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a renowned Zen master whose students achieved profound realization through diligent practice. Filled with spiritual ambition and eager to transform his life, the young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with enthusiasm, he immediately sought an audience with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room overlooking a garden, where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and graceful. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with absolute diligence and unwavering effort, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that radiated from his posture. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely, with the right approach, the process could be accelerated. "But master," he said, leaning forward intently, "what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more texts, practice more intensively? How long then?" The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, "Well, 20 years." The young man's face showed his confusion and growing frustration. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his commitment. "But master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this," he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if I really work at it? What if I dedicate every waking moment to practice, sleep only when absolutely necessary, and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then I could achieve realization much faster. How long would it take then?" 30 years, the master replied without hesitation. By now, the student was completely bewildered and increasingly agitated. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, martial arts, scholarship, harder work produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? "Master, I do not understand," he said, no longer able to hide his disappointment and confusion. "Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. "When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path," the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the paradox of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal fixation actually slow our spiritual development? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that excessive focus on attainment creates obstacles to realization. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our consciousness is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined destination, we cannot fully inhabit the present moment practices that actually cultivate awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you'll be good enough to perform publicly, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, rhythm, and tone that develops skill. The music emerges through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between musician and instrument, not through anxious projection toward future competence. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the subtle grasping that turns spiritual practice into a transaction. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study texts to accumulate wisdom, or cultivate compassion to become better people, we're approaching the path as consumers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a fundamental split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This profound teaching points to the very heart of the master's lesson. Zen is not something we attain, but something we recognize. It's not a destination we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom illuminates why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we're frantically pursuing enlightenment, we're operating from the assumption that our present experience is somehow inadequate or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we're seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most profound insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without agenda. These moments of natural awareness reveal what the master was pointing toward. That wisdom emerges when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else, or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's error wasn't his desire for realization, but his assumption that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he proposed working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster, the more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to flee. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called just sitting. Meditation without gaining mind, without agenda, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than forcing them through willful effort. Consider how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships, where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work, where forcing inspiration typically produces stilted results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined destinations, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." By walking the path with undivided attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about transforming our relationship with suffering. This is the tale of the salt and the lake. In a quiet monastery nestled among rolling hills, there lived an aging master, renowned for his patience and wisdom. Among his students was a young apprentice whose heart had become heavy with complaints about life's difficulties. Each morning, the apprentice would arrive with fresh grievances. "Master, why is life so hard? Yesterday, my meditation was disturbed by noise. Today, my back aches from the hard floor. When will this suffering end?" His voice carried the weight of someone who had catalogued every small discomfort until they had grown into an overwhelming burden. The master listened with infinite patience, but as days turned to weeks, he recognized that words alone would not shift his student's perspective. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their simple dwelling, the master made an unusual request. "My dear student," he said gently, "I need you to go to the kitchen and bring me some salt. Just a handful will suffice." The apprentice, puzzled by this simple task, nonetheless obeyed. He returned with cupped palms containing coarse white crystals. "Now," the master instructed, producing a small glass of water, "place all of that salt into this glass and drink it." The young man hesitated. "Master, that seems like far too much salt for such a small amount of water." "Trust the process," the master replied. "Drink." The apprentice poured the salt into the glass, watching the crystals dissolve into a cloudy, unappetizing mixture. He lifted it to his lips and took a large gulp, immediately grimacing as the intensely bitter taste filled his mouth. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Bitter," the apprentice spat. "Terribly, overwhelmingly bitter. I can barely stand it." The master chuckled softly. "Excellent. Now bring that same amount of salt and come with me." Together, they walked in contemplative silence until they reached the shores of a pristine mountain lake. The water stretched before them like a mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where earth ended and heaven began. "Now," the master said, "place this handful of salt into the lake." The apprentice waded into the shallow water and opened his hands, watching as the salt crystals scattered across the lake's surface, quickly dissolving without leaving any visible trace. "Drink from the lake," the master instructed. The young man cupped the lake water in his hands and brought it to his lips. The water was clean, refreshing, with the pure taste of mountain streams. "How does it taste?" the master asked. "Much fresher," the apprentice replied, genuinely surprised. "Clean and pure." "Do you taste the salt?" the master inquired gently. The student paused, paying careful attention. "No," he said slowly. "I don't taste any salt at all." The master sat beside his student on a smooth stone at the water's edge. His weathered hands reached out to clasp the young man's hands in profound tenderness. "My dear student," the master said, "the pain of life is pure salt, no more, no less. The amount of pain in existence remains constant, but the amount of bitterness we experience depends entirely on the container we put that pain into." The apprentice listened with new understanding. "When you are in pain," the master continued, "the only thing you can truly control is your response. You can choose to be a small glass where every grain of salt overwhelms your senses. Or you can choose to enlarge your sense of things, to become like this vast lake where the same salt dissolves harmlessly into something much greater." The master paused. "Stop being a glass, my friend. Become a lake. The Buddha once said, 'Pain is certain, suffering is optional.' This fundamental teaching reveals the heart of our relationship with difficulty. We cannot eliminate the challenges woven into human existence, but we have tremendous power over how that pain affects us. What emerges from this story is understanding about consciousness itself. Our awareness is not fixed in size. It can contract into the narrow confines of a glass, where every difficulty looms enormous. Or it can expand into the spaciousness of a lake, where the same difficulties become manageable. Why do we often choose to be the glass rather than the lake? First is our tendency toward pain myopia, becoming so focused on discomfort that it fills our entire awareness. Second is our habit of story proliferation, taking a single, painful event and creating elaborate narratives about how unfair life is. Third is the comparing mind, measuring our pain against an imaginary standard of how life should be. The lake perspective doesn't minimize genuine pain or suggest passivity. Rather, it offers a skillful way of relating to inevitable challenges that doesn't compound them with unnecessary suffering. From lake consciousness, we can respond to problems more creatively because we're not overwhelmed. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." From the lake perspective, we remember that everything arises and passes away within the vast space of awareness. Today's crisis becomes tomorrow's memory. We become a lake through practices that naturally expand awareness. Meditation teaches us to rest in spacious presence. Gratitude helps us notice experiences beyond immediate difficulties. Service reminds us that our pain is part of shared human experience. Tonight, as you reflect on current challenges, can you sense the difference between experiencing them from glass consciousness versus lake consciousness? What would it feel like to allow your awareness to expand beyond the immediate intensity of difficulties to include the vast context of this moment? As the Buddha taught, if you want to know your mind, sit down and observe it. If your mind is clear, happiness will come. The clarity he speaks of is not the absence of salt, but the spaciousness to hold it skillfully. In becoming lakes rather than glasses, we discover that pain can become a gateway to deeper compassion and freedom. Let us now turn to a story about the fundamental truth that governs all experience. This is the teaching of the meditation student and the wise reminder. A young student had been practicing meditation for several months with sincere dedication. Each morning and evening, he would sit quietly on his cushion, close his eyes, and attempt to follow the breathing techniques his teacher had shown him. Some days, the practice felt natural and peaceful, but recently he had been struggling with what seemed like constant distraction and discomfort. On this particular morning, he could barely sit still for 5 minutes before frustration overwhelmed him. His mind raced with thoughts about work, relationships, and a dozen trivial concerns. His legs ached from sitting in an unfamiliar position, and despite his best efforts to focus on his breath, he found himself constantly pulled away by mental chatter and physical restlessness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, he gave up on his practice and sought out his meditation teacher. He found the elderly monk tending a small garden behind the meditation hall, peacefully pulling weeds in the early morning sunlight. "Teacher," the student said, his voice heavy with discouragement and self-criticism, "my meditation is horrible. I can't focus on anything. I feel so distracted and scattered. My legs ache constantly, and I keep falling asleep when I'm not distracted. Everything about my practice feels wrong. It's just horrible." The teacher looked up from his gardening, soil still clinging to his weathered hands, and met the student's frustrated gaze with calm, knowing eyes. He listened to the young man's litany of complaints without judgment or surprise, as if he had heard these exact same words countless times before. "It will pass," the teacher said matter-of-factly, then returned to his weeding as if nothing unusual had occurred. The student stood there for a moment, somewhat taken aback by the brevity and seeming dismissiveness of the response. He had expected detailed advice, perhaps some new technique, or at least some reassurance about his difficulties. Instead, he received just 3 simple words. Feeling somewhat unsatisfied but having nothing more to say, he returned to his room to contemplate this cryptic guidance. Over the following days, the student continued his practice despite his frustrations. Gradually, something began to shift. The intense distraction started to subside. His body adjusted to the sitting position, and moments of genuine peace began to emerge between the chaos of thoughts. By the end of the week, his meditation had transformed completely. Excited by this positive change, he once again sought out his teacher, this time finding him sweeping leaves from the temple courtyard. The student's face glowed with enthusiasm and relief. "Teacher," he exclaimed, "my meditation is wonderful now. I feel so aware, so peaceful, so alive during my practice. My mind is clear, my body is comfortable, and I am experiencing the most beautiful states of consciousness. Everything about my meditation is just wonderful." The teacher paused in his sweeping, looked at the student with the same calm expression he had worn the week before, and gave exactly the same response. "It will pass." This time the student heard the deeper teaching. His excitement about his wonderful meditation began to transform into something subtler, not disappointment, but understanding. he realized that his teacher was pointing to something fundamental about the nature of all experience, not just meditation. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "This too shall pass." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the impermanent nature of all phenomena, both pleasant and unpleasant, both the experiences we cling to and those we try to escape. Why do we struggle so intensely with the changing nature of our experience? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes from our resistance to impermanence, our desperate attempts to hold on to pleasant states, and our equally desperate attempts to escape unpleasant ones. We exhaust ourselves trying to control what is essentially uncontrollable. The student's meditation experiences, both horrible and wonderful, were equally temporary. His teacher's consistent response pointed to a deeper stability that exists beneath the constantly changing surface of experience. This isn't the stability of unchanging conditions, but the stability of awareness itself, the space in which all changing experiences arise and pass away. Consider your own relationship with the ups and downs of daily life. How much energy do you spend trying to perpetuate good moods, successful periods, or comfortable circumstances? How much resistance do you feel toward difficult emotions, challenging phases, or uncomfortable situations? Both the grasping and the resistance create unnecessary suffering. In Zen practice, we learn to develop what might be called equanimity with impermanence. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to our experiences or not caring about outcomes. Rather, it means developing the capacity to remain centered and responsive, regardless of whether current circumstances are pleasant or unpleasant. The teacher's repeated phrase, "It will pass," contains both comfort and challenge. It offers comfort during difficult times by reminding us that no painful state lasts forever. It challenges us during pleasant times by preventing us from building our identity around temporary successes or peak experiences. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the same truth the meditation teacher was sharing. We can fully appreciate and engage with our current experience while simultaneously holding it lightly, knowing it will inevitably change. Look deeply at your own patterns of attachment and aversion. Where in your life are you trying to make permanent what is naturally temporary? Where are you exhausting yourself fighting against conditions that will shift on their own if you simply allow them to run their natural course? The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence." This teaching invites us to pour ourselves wholeheartedly into life while simultaneously holding all outcomes lightly. We can care deeply about our practice, our relationships, our work, and our growth, while remembering that all forms and experiences are temporary visitors in the space of awareness. This understanding transforms how we relate to both success and failure, both pleasure and pain. Instead of being thrown around by the inevitable fluctuations of life, we can find our stability in the awareness that remains constant while everything else changes. Tonight, as you notice whatever states of mind and body are present, whether comfortable or uncomfortable, pleasant or unpleasant, clear or confused, can you remember the meditation teacher's simple wisdom? Can you hold your current experience fully while simultaneously knowing that it, like everything else, will pass? As the Buddha observed, just as the great ocean has one taste, the taste of salt, so also this teaching has one taste, the taste of liberation. The taste of liberation is found not in achieving permanent pleasant states, but in discovering the freedom that comes from dancing gracefully with the ever-changing nature of existence itself. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances and the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a bustling merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built elaborate houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose prosperity was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his ornate front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed disdain. "What do you want, beggar?" the gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers." "I am traveling and seeking alms," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious contempt. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance. Clearly this was just another vagrant trying to take advantage of his master's household. "Be gone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere." The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate. But now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, when the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally, offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a sumptuous feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast, as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me, it is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own superficial judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, judge not by appearances, a rich heart may be under a poor coat. Here we discover how our fixation on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and hierarchies based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols, rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters. His wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely, based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we've been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us toward a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive a different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help, or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we're wearing rags or ceremonial robes, whether others treat us with respect or dismissal. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your original face is not born and does not die." This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant, regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the symbols of status, while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions. Each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles, to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, Can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant, whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast, prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the difference between resistance and flow. This is the teaching of the old man and the waterfall. In a mountain village where a swift river carved its way through ancient rocks, an old Taoist sage often walked along the water's edge, observing the interplay between the flowing current and the solid stones that tried to redirect its path. The villagers knew him as a gentle, contemplative man who seemed to understand something profound about the natural world that others missed. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered and rain began to fall, the river swelled with unusual force. The current grew violent and unpredictable, rushing toward a high waterfall that dropped into a rocky gorge below. Most people avoided the area during such conditions, knowing that anyone who fell into the rapids would face almost certain death against the jagged rocks at the bottom of the falls. The old man, however, had been caught by the sudden storm while walking along his usual path. As he tried to make his way back to safety, the muddy bank gave way beneath his feet. Before he could catch himself, he tumbled into the raging torrent and was immediately swept away by the powerful current. Villagers who witnessed his fall cried out in horror. They ran along the riverbank, helplessly watching as the old man was carried toward the waterfall by waters too violent and swift for any rescue attempt. They could only watch in anguish as he disappeared over the edge, plunging into the churning chaos below. Everyone assumed the worst. No one could survive such a fall, especially not an elderly man with limited strength. The villagers prepared themselves to search for his body downstream, once the waters calmed enough to make such a search possible. But to their amazement, as they hurried toward the base of the waterfall, they saw the old man emerging from the water far below, completely unharmed. He walked calmly to the shore, water streaming from his clothes, and sat down to rest as peacefully as if he had simply taken a refreshing swim on a pleasant day. The villagers rushed to him, unable to believe what they had witnessed. "How is this possible?" they asked in wonder. "How did you survive that terrible fall? The water was so violent, the rocks so dangerous. By all reason, you should have been killed." The old man smiled at their concern and amazement. He wrung water from his sleeves and considered their question carefully before answering. "I survived," he said simply, "because I accommodated myself to the water, not the water to me. When I felt myself falling, I did not fight against the current or try to force it to change direction. Without thinking, I allowed myself to be shaped by it. When the water wanted to go down, I went down. When it swirled, I swirled with it. Plunging into the whirlpool, I came out with the whirlpool. I became like the water itself, and this is how I survived." The villagers listened in silence, beginning to understand that they had witnessed something far more than a fortunate accident. They had seen a demonstration of a profound principle that the old man had spent years learning from his careful observation of the natural world. As the Buddha taught, nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming. Here we discover the wisdom of working with life's currents, rather than exhausting ourselves in futile resistance to forces beyond our control. Why do we instinctively fight against difficult circumstances when flow and adaptation might serve us better? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind believes it can control external conditions through force of will. But this approach often creates more suffering than the original difficulty. The old man's survival wasn't mere luck. It was the result of understanding something essential about the nature of existence itself. When we align ourselves with the natural flow of events, rather than demanding that life conform to our preferences, we often discover resources and possibilities that resistance makes invisible. Consider your own relationship with challenging circumstances. How much energy do you spend fighting against situations you cannot change? The old man's teaching suggests a different approach, not passive submission, but conscious adaptation that maintains our essential nature while flowing with changing conditions. This doesn't mean accepting harmful situations or abandoning our values. The old man didn't give up his desire to survive. He simply changed his strategy for survival. Instead of fighting the water's power, he used it. Instead of resisting its direction, he moved with it while maintaining his awareness and intention. In relationships, careers, and personal challenges, we often face similar choices. We can exhaust ourselves trying to force outcomes, control other people's behavior, or make external circumstances conform to our expectations. Or we can learn to work skillfully with what is actually present, finding creative ways to achieve our deeper purposes through accommodation rather than force. Zen master Lao Tzu taught, "Water is fluid, soft, and yielding, but water will wear away rock, which cannot yield and is destroyed." The old man embodied this teaching, demonstrating that apparent weakness can be a source of tremendous strength when applied with wisdom. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." This principle extends beyond hatred to all forms of resistance. Problems are rarely solved by fighting against them directly, but by understanding their nature and finding ways to work with the underlying forces involved. Look deeply at a current source of stress or conflict in your life. Where are you trying to force the water to change direction rather than learning to swim with it? What would it mean to accommodate yourself to the situation while maintaining your essential values and intentions? Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable currents of daily life, unexpected changes, difficult people, circumstances beyond your control, can you remember the old man's wisdom? Can you find ways to maintain your center while flowing with forces you cannot change, discovering that sometimes the most direct path to your goals is the one that appears to go around obstacles rather than through them? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Learning to flow with life's currents is ultimately about letting go of our need to control everything while maintaining our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. Like water, we can be both powerful and yielding, both persistent and adaptive, both strong and gentle. Our next story speaks to the moment when understanding transcends effort. This is no water, no moon. The nun Chiono had devoted many years to intensive Zen study and practice. She spent countless hours in meditation, wrestling with profound koans and contemplating the deepest teachings of the Buddha. Her dedication was unwavering. She rose before dawn each day, sat in perfect posture through pain and discomfort, and approached her spiritual practice with the kind of fierce determination that impressed even her teachers. Despite her sincere efforts and obvious commitment, enlightenment continued to elude her. She could understand the concepts intellectually, speak eloquently about emptiness and non-duality, and even guide other students through basic meditation techniques. But the final breakthrough, the direct realization that would transform her understanding completely, remained just beyond her grasp. Years passed this way. Chiono began to feel a growing frustration with her practice. She watched as other students seemed to achieve insights that remained mysterious to her. She questioned her methods, intensified her efforts, and sometimes wondered if she lacked some essential capacity for awakening that others possessed naturally. One night, after a particularly long day of meditation and study, Chiono was walking slowly back to her small quarters. She carried an old wooden water pail that she had filled at the well earlier that evening. The pail was ancient, held together by strips of bamboo that had grown worn and weak with age. It had served faithfully for many years, but she could feel it becoming increasingly fragile in her hands. As she walked through the moonlit courtyard, she became mesmerized by the sight before her. The full moon hung perfectly in the dark sky above, its bright light illuminating the temple grounds with a soft, ethereal glow. But what captured her attention was the reflection of that moon in the water she carried. There, contained within her humble pail, was a perfect, unbroken circle of light. The moon itself, complete and radiant, held in water. She walked carefully, almost reverently, watching this reflected moon dance gently with each step she took. The image was so clear, so perfect, that it seemed as real as the moon in the sky above. For a moment, she felt she was carrying something sacred, transporting this luminous presence from the well to her room. Suddenly, without warning, the aged bamboo strips that held the pail together finally gave way. The bottom of the bucket fell out completely, and all the water rushed to the ground in a single, swift motion. In an instant, the reflection of the moon vanished completely. With no water, there was no moon. At that precise moment, watching the reflected moon disappear as the water hit the earth, Chiono experienced complete liberation. All her years of seeking, striving, and effort suddenly revealed themselves as unnecessary. The very thing she had been chasing, enlightenment, awakening, understanding, had never been separate from her to begin with. Like the moon's reflection, it had appeared to exist independently, but it was simply the natural expression of what was already present. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Look within, you are the Buddha." The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual realization often comes not through accumulation, but through release, not through grasping, but through letting go. This ancient tale illuminates a fundamental paradox in all spiritual seeking. We begin the path believing that enlightenment is something we must acquire, achieve, or attain through effort and discipline. We imagine it as a distant goal, a state of consciousness we don't currently possess, but might earn through sufficient practice and dedication. Chiono's years of sincere effort weren't wasted. They were necessary preparation, like tenderizing the soil before planting seeds. But her breakthrough came precisely when she stopped trying to capture and hold on to spiritual realization, and instead witnessed its natural arising and dissolving. Why do we find it so difficult to recognize what is already present? The seeking mind creates the very separation it hopes to overcome. When we believe that awakening exists out there or in the future, we overlook the awareness that is reading these words right now, the consciousness that experiences thoughts and emotions without being limited by them. Consider how this pattern plays out in your own spiritual life or personal development. Do you sometimes feel like you're chasing insights, trying to grasp peace, or working to achieve a state of mind that seems just beyond reach? The very effort to capture these experiences can prevent us from recognizing that the awareness capable of seeking is already what we're seeking. This doesn't mean abandoning all spiritual practice or personal growth efforts. Chiono's years of discipline created the conditions for her realization, but it does point toward a different relationship with practice, engaging wholeheartedly while holding the results lightly, like carrying water that might spill at any moment. Zen master Bankei expressed this understanding when he said, "The unborn is the Buddha mind itself. When you have realized this fact, the Buddha mind with which you were born from your mother has done the Buddha's work from the very beginning." What we're seeking in meditation, therapy, or personal growth is the recognition of what was never absent. The water and moon in the story represent the apparent duality between seeker and sought, between the ordinary mind and the awakened mind. As long as we believe these are separate, that the moon exists independently in the water, we try to protect and preserve our spiritual experiences. But when the container breaks, we discover that the separation was illusory. This teaching extends beyond formal spiritual practice into every area of life where we chase happiness, success, or fulfillment, as if these were objects to be acquired rather than expressions of our true nature. The perfect relationship, the ideal job, the peaceful state of mind. These are often reflections we try to capture and hold, not recognizing that their essence is already present in our capacity to appreciate and seek them. In Zen practice, we learn to trust the process of natural unfolding rather than forcing insights or demanding particular experiences. Sometimes the most profound understanding comes when we stop trying so hard to understand, when we let the bottom fall out of our containers and allow our carefully constructed spiritual images to dissolve. The Buddha taught, "The one who has conquered himself is a far greater hero than he who has defeated 1,000 times 1,000 men." The conquest Chiono achieved was not victory over ignorance, but recognition that the battle itself was based on a misunderstanding. Tonight, as you reflect on your own seeking and striving, can you imagine what it might feel like to let the bottom fall out of your spiritual container? What would happen if you stopped trying to capture and hold on to your insights and instead trusted the natural wisdom that already animates your seeking? As the Buddha reminded us, within you there is a stillness and a sanctuary to which you can retreat at any time and be yourself. Perhaps what we're looking for has been looking through our eyes all along. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a teaching about the profound difference between passive surrender and active compassion. This is the parable of the lion and the fox. In a land where drought had lasted many months and both humans and animals struggled to find sustenance, there lived a man whose heart burned with spiritual longing. Every day he prayed with desperate intensity, asking for the awareness and wisdom that would bring success to his life. His prayers were sincere, but filled with anxiety, for he had tried many approaches to prosperity, various jobs, different strategies, numerous plans, yet nothing had brought him the security and fulfillment he sought. His frustration grew as his resources dwindled and his situation became increasingly precarious. There must be some secret to life that I'm missing, he thought. Some spiritual principle that, once understood, will unlock the doors to abundance and peace. One night, after hours of fervent prayer, he fell into a deep sleep and began to dream. In his dream, a voice spoke to him with crystal clarity. "Go into the forest tomorrow morning. There you will find the understanding you seek." The man woke with his heart pounding with excitement and hope. This felt different from ordinary dreams. The voice had carried such authority, such certainty. Without delay, he prepared simple provisions and set out at first light for the ancient forest that bordered his village. For several hours, he wandered among towering trees and winding paths, his eyes searching for some sign, some teacher, some revelation that would provide the answers to his prayers. The morning air was cool and fragrant with wildflowers, but his anxiety made it difficult to appreciate the natural beauty surrounding him. As midday heat began to build, exhaustion forced him to rest beside a small stream. He sat on a smooth boulder, wondering if he had misunderstood the dream's message, when movement caught his eye between two large rocks in a shaded alcove nearby. To his amazement, he discovered a fox lying peacefully in the cool space. But this fox had no legs. Where its limbs should have been, there were only healed scars. Yet the animal appeared calm and well-nourished rather than starving or distressed as he would have expected. How extraordinary, the man thought. How does a creature with no ability to hunt or forage manage to survive in the wilderness? Curious and sensing this might be connected to his spiritual quest, he concealed himself and waited to see what would happen. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in golden light, he heard heavy footsteps approaching through the underbrush. A magnificent lion emerged into the clearing, carrying fresh meat in its powerful jaws. Without any apparent reason or expectation of return, the lion gently placed the meat directly in front of the legless fox, and then disappeared back into the forest. The man's heart leaped with understanding. "Ah," he exclaimed silently, "now I see the secret to success in life. The answer is complete surrender and trust. I don't need to struggle and strive and worry about providing for myself. All I need to do is have faith that the universe will take care of all my needs. God will provide everything, just as the lion provides for the fox. My role is simply to trust and receive." Filled with this new spiritual insight, the man returned home and immediately began practicing what he believed he had learned. He stopped seeking work, stopped making efforts to improve his situation, and instead spent his days in prayer and meditation, waiting for providence to supply his needs as it had for the legless fox. Days passed, then weeks. His food stores depleted, his strength began to fade, and his situation became desperate. Yet he maintained his faith that his surrender would be rewarded, that his trust would be vindicated by divine intervention. 2 weeks into this experiment, weak from hunger and beginning to doubt his interpretation, the man had another vivid dream. The same authoritative voice that had sent him to the forest now spoke again, but this time with a tone of gentle correction. "Fool," the voice said, not with cruelty, but with compassionate clarity. "Be like the lion, not like the fox." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." The story points us toward understanding the profound difference between spiritual surrender and spiritual service. Why do we sometimes mistake passivity for spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind often seeks the path of least resistance, preferring to receive rather than give, to be cared for rather than to care for others. True surrender involves releasing our attachment to outcomes while maintaining wholehearted engagement with compassionate action. The man's initial interpretation represented a common spiritual misunderstanding, the belief that faith means waiting for external forces to solve our problems. But genuine spiritual maturity involves recognizing our responsibility to be the hands and heart through which compassion flows into the world. Look deeply at your own relationship to giving and receiving. Are there areas where you've been waiting for others to provide what you could offer yourself? Perhaps waiting for someone else to create the community you long for, to start the project you've envisioned, or to show the kindness you wish to see in the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between victim consciousness and co-creator consciousness. The fox, through no choice of its own, required care and received it through the lion's generosity. But humans possess capacities the fox lacks: intelligence, creativity, the ability to plan and provide not only for ourselves, but for others who truly cannot provide for themselves. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual awakening doesn't exempt us from worldly responsibility, but transforms how we engage with it. True faith isn't passive waiting, but active participation in the web of interdependence that connects all beings. We are called to be both lion and fox, receiving grace when we genuinely need it, offering strength when others require our support. Consider the people in your life who might be in the fox's position through circumstances beyond their control: illness, age, disability, or temporary crisis. And consider the areas where you have lion-like capacities, skills, resources, energy, or opportunities that could serve others' well-being. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." This teaching points toward the natural movement from self-preoccupation to selfless service that marks spiritual maturity. The man's transformation from seeking to be cared for to recognizing his calling to care for others represents the shift from spiritual materialism to genuine Dharma practice. Instead of using spirituality to get what we want, we begin using our gifts to give what others need. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called the Bodhisattva ideal, the aspiration to work for the liberation of all beings, rather than seeking only our own comfort and security. This doesn't mean we neglect our genuine needs, but that we hold them within the larger context of universal well-being. The Buddha said, "If you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path." Often, the success and fulfillment we seek comes not through focusing on our own needs, but through dedicating ourselves to serving something greater than our personal concerns. This teaching challenges us to examine our motivations for spiritual practice itself. Are we seeking enlightenment as a form of ultimate self-improvement, or are we cultivating wisdom and compassion to better serve the world's needs? Are we praying for divine provision, Or are we asking how we can become instruments of provision for others? The voice in the dream offered correction with love, not condemnation. The man's initial misunderstanding was part of his learning process, not a spiritual failure. Sometimes we need to experience our own helplessness before we can understand our power to help others. Tonight, as you consider the gifts and capacities you've been given, can you sense how they might be intended, not just for your own security, but for the welfare of others? Can you feel the difference between spiritual seeking that focuses on what you can get and spiritual practice that asks what you can give? As the Buddha taught, in caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others. The lion's generous feeding of the fox represents the natural flow of compassion that arises when we recognize our fundamental interconnection. By being the lion when we can, we ensure that others will be lions for us when we truly need their care. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master were sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough, but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, a profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes, and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own, As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the most fundamental truth that surrounds us yet remains invisible. This is the tale of the fish and the ocean. In the vast depths of the Pacific, where sunlight filtered down through layers of blue and green, and coral gardens swayed in gentle currents, a young fish swam restlessly through familiar waters. Despite being surrounded by the wonder of ocean life, schools of silver fish moving like liquid metal, sea anemones dancing in the current, and the rhythmic pulse of waves far above, the young fish felt troubled by a persistent question. One day, approaching an ancient sea turtle whose shell bore the scars and wisdom of countless journeys, the young fish asked earnestly, "Elder, I keep hearing other sea creatures talk about something they call the ocean. They speak of it with such reverence, as if it's the most important thing in existence. But I've searched everywhere, and I cannot find this ocean anywhere. What exactly is this mysterious thing everyone talks about?" The old turtle's eyes, deep and patient like tidal pools, regarded the young fish with gentle amusement. "Little one," the turtle replied in a voice worn smooth by decades of storms and calms, "the ocean is this very thing that surrounds you on all sides at every moment." The young fish looked around frantically, darting left and right, swimming up toward the distant surface and down toward the sandy bottom. "But I don't see anything surrounding me. There's nothing here but water and fish and plants and rocks. Where is this ocean you speak of? Why can't I see it?" The turtle settled more comfortably on a bed of soft kelp, understanding that this was a teaching moment that required patience. "Of course you cannot see it, young friend," the turtle explained. "The ocean is both inside and outside of you. You were born in the ocean. You breathe the ocean. You are nourished by the ocean. And one day you will return to the ocean. The ocean flows through your gills and around your body just as naturally as your own scales cover your skin. It is so much a part of you that it has become invisible." The young fish paused, beginning to sense something vast and fundamental that had been present all along but remained unnamed. "You mean this water I swim through is the ocean?" "Yes," the turtle confirmed. "You have never been separate from it, not for a single moment of your existence. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with awareness." This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with the Tao, the fundamental flow of existence that permeates everything, yet remains largely unnoticed in our daily lives. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual blindness. Like the fish who cannot see the ocean, we live immersed in the sacred, but fail to recognize it because it is too close, too constant, too fundamental to our existence to register as separate from ourselves. Why do we struggle to perceive the Tao, this universal flow that sustains and surrounds us? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of seeking the extraordinary while overlooking the ordinary. We imagine that spiritual truth must be dramatic, mystical, or separate from everyday experience. We look for God in burning bushes while missing the divine presence in morning coffee, in the breath entering our lungs, in the simple fact of awareness itself. The Tao expresses itself in everything we encounter: the changing seasons, the cycles of sleep and waking, the rhythm of our heartbeat, the way thoughts arise and dissolve in consciousness. It is the organizing principle behind both the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of fern leaves, the same pattern expressing itself at every scale of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you might glimpse this underlying flow without recognizing it. The way traffic naturally organizes itself, despite having no central controller. The way conversations find their own rhythm and timing, the way your body breathes without conscious direction, the way solutions to problems seem to emerge from somewhere beyond deliberate thinking. These are all expressions of the Tao working through apparent chaos to create spontaneous order. Zen teacher Alan Watts taught, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The Tao is similar. It cannot be grasped or contained because we are expressions of it rather than separate observers of it. Every attempt to understand the Tao through conceptual thinking is like the fish trying to get outside the ocean to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean the Tao is merely a philosophical concept. It is the most practical and immediate reality. The intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body, the awareness in which all thoughts and sensations appear, the life force that animates everything from redwood trees to bacteria. In Chinese philosophy, the character for Tao literally means the way or the path. But this is not a path we walk towards some distant destination. It is the path that walks itself through us, the way reality unfolds moment by moment, without requiring our management or control. Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Yet here we are, using words to point towards something beyond words. This is the beautiful paradox of spiritual teaching. We must use the limited to point towards the unlimited, knowing that the finger pointing at the moon is never the moon itself. Tonight, as you feel the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, can you sense the Tao expressing itself through this simple miracle? Can you recognize in this automatic process the same intelligence that moves the planets and changes the seasons? The Buddha taught, "Look within, thou art the Buddha." You are not separate from the ocean of existence any more than a wave is separate from the sea. In recognizing this fundamental non-separation, we stop seeking the Tao and begin living as its conscious expression. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all our possessions and positions. This is the story of the inn that calls itself a palace. In ancient India, a renowned spiritual teacher had spent many years wandering from village to village, sharing the Buddha's teachings with anyone who would listen. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, reaching even the ears of kings and nobles. One day, during his travels, he arrived at the capital city of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rose above the bustling streets like a jeweled crown. The palace was truly a wonder to behold. Its walls were constructed of the finest marble, inlaid with precious stones that caught and reflected the sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and flowing fountains surrounded the structure, and guards in gleaming armor stood at attention throughout the grounds. It was clearly the dwelling of someone who commanded immense wealth and power. The spiritual teacher approached the main entrance with the same calm dignity he brought to every encounter, whether with kings or beggars. The guards, recognizing him by his simple robes and serene presence, made no move to stop him. Word of his arrival had preceded him, and they had been instructed to allow him passage. Walking through corridors lined with silk tapestries and golden statues, the teacher made his way directly to the throne room, where the king sat upon an elaborately carved chair elevated above the marble floor. Courtiers in fine clothes gathered around the throne, their jeweled ornaments glinting in the light from tall windows. The king, a middle-aged man wearing robes of deep purple silk and a crown of gold and diamonds, looked up as the teacher entered. He had been expecting this visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect from their encounter. "What do you want?" the king asked directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers and unquestioning obedience. The teacher bowed respectfully, but spoke with quiet confidence. "Your Majesty, I would like a place to sleep in this inn." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled courtiers. The king's eyebrows rose, and his expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "But this is not an inn," the king replied, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler of this kingdom, and this has been the seat of royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this information carefully. "I see. May I ask, Your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "He ruled here for 30 years before his death. This palace was his seat of power, as it is now mine." "Ah," the teacher said with genuine interest. "And who owned it before him?" "My grandfather," the king answered, beginning to sense where these questions might lead. "He too ruled from this throne. He also is dead." The teacher paused, allowing the weight of these words to settle in the vast throne room. The courtiers had grown quiet, sensing the profound direction of this unusual conversation. Even the king found himself waiting, almost despite himself, for the teacher's response. Finally, the teacher spoke with gentle clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the ornate room. "And this place where people live for a short time and then move on, did I hear you say that it is not an inn?" The silence that followed was complete. The king sat motionless on his throne, the teacher's words penetrating layers of assumption and identity he had never questioned. The courtiers remained frozen, as if witnessing something beyond their normal understanding of royal protocol and worldly power. The Buddha taught, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This profound truth reveals itself in the teacher's penetrating question about the inn that calls itself a palace. Why do we cling so fiercely to possessions and positions that are, by their very nature, temporary? Zen Buddhism explains that our attachment to permanence creates suffering because it conflicts with the fundamental reality of impermanence. Everything we think we own, including our own bodies and identities, we hold only temporarily. Look deeply at your own experience. The house you call yours, the car you drive, the job title you carry, the bank account balance you monitor, all of these are temporary arrangements. You inhabit them for a period of time, then move on, just as others inhabited them before you and will inhabit them after you. This doesn't mean we should become indifferent to our responsibilities or careless with our possessions. Rather, it invites us to hold them more lightly, recognizing their transient nature. The king's palace was indeed magnificent and served important functions, but it was also unmistakably an inn where occupants stayed temporarily before departing. The deeper teaching here shows us how identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering when we forget the impermanent nature of our positions, whether as parent, professional, homeowner, or even student of Zen. We create anxiety trying to maintain what cannot be permanently maintained. Consider your own attachments. Perhaps it's your professional identity, your relationships, your health, or your spiritual achievements. Each of these is precious and worthy of care, but each is also subject to change. The executive becomes retired, the parent becomes empty nester, the student becomes teacher, the healthy person faces illness, These transitions are not failures, but natural expressions of impermanence. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." This teaching reframes impermanence from something to fear into something to celebrate. Because nothing lasts forever. Suffering states can transform into joy. Closed hearts can open to love. And even the most entrenched patterns can shift toward wisdom. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called non-attachment, caring deeply while holding lightly. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent, but that we learn to love without clinging, to work without grasping, and to enjoy without demanding permanence. The spiritual teacher's insight pierces through the illusion that any of us are permanent owners of anything. We are all temporary guests in the inn of existence, borrowing our roles and possessions for the brief time we inhabit them. This recognition can bring either despair or profound liberation, depending on how we receive it. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Everything is impermanent. Try to accomplish as much virtue as possible." This teaching encourages us not to waste our temporary time in the inn, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion while we have the opportunity. Tonight, as you rest in your own temporary dwelling, surrounded by your own temporary possessions, can you feel the profound freedom that comes with recognizing their transient nature? Can you sense how this recognition might actually increase your appreciation rather than diminish it? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. By remembering the temporary nature of our stay in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment we're given to practice love and awareness. Tonight, as we draw our time together to a peaceful close, can you feel how the calm you've discovered isn't something you need to chase or earn, but rather something that has always been quietly waiting within you? Can you notice that the deep stillness you've touched through these ancient tales lives not only in the words we've shared, but in your own natural awareness, always present and ready to welcome you home? The Buddha taught us, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. Holding this wisdom close, remember that the tranquility and understanding you seek don't require perfect conditions or extraordinary moments, but flourish naturally from your own inner landscape, available whenever you choose to turn inward. Through tonight's collection of timeless stories, each narrative has offered you a gentle reminder, pointing again and again to the same life-changing understanding. That struggle softens when we learn to let go. That genuine freedom flows naturally when we stop fighting what is. And that lasting peace emerges when we see through the stories our minds create about how things should be. Even when thoughts wander, even when everyday worries return tomorrow, the ancient wisdom you've received tonight has taken root in the depths of your being, ready to guide and comfort you whenever you need it most. Reflect as you prepare for sleep on how these age-old teachings have revealed not some far-off destination, but a way of resting completely in this very moment. In the stillness that surrounds you now, allow yourself to recognize how profoundly your perspective has expanded, how effortlessly your breathing has deepened, and how completely your mind can now rest, unburdened and at ease. These stories remind us that authentic wisdom isn't hidden in distant monasteries or buried in complex philosophies. It lives quietly and clearly in the simple act of being fully present to what is. Tonight, you've touched that reality, a truth that becomes obvious when we stop searching and start noticing. As you transition from this restful space into peaceful sleep, take with you not just the tales themselves, but the gentle clarity and deep calm they have awakened in you. May this understanding stay close, lighting your path through whatever tomorrow may bring, both joyful and challenging moments alike. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.